Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 RTPI North East Young Planners Professional Visit, which is quite a mouthful. My name is Dominic Crowley, Senior Planner at Lichfields and the former Chair of the North East Young Planners Committee. I'm joined today by 4 members of the Young Planners Steering Group. If I could just ask you all to briefly introduce yourselves. Katherine, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Yeah, hi, my name's Katherine Simpson. I'm this year's chair of the North East Young Planners Committee. I'm a planner at Lichfields and I've been there 4 years, and I've probably been involved with the committee for just over 2.5 years, where before I was the committee secretary as well.
Thank you. Al, do you want to go next, please?
Hi, yes, I'm Alastair Welch. I'm Vice Chair of the North East Young Planners this year. I work for Defra as a Senior Policy Advisor and present today in a personal capacity. Hi.
Brilliant. Patrick?
Hello, I'm Patrick Johnston, Group Assistant Planner at Persimmon. I've been here for just over a year, and I'm part of this Young Planners Steering Group since February 2019.
Thank you. And Nicola?
Hi, I'm Nicola Crowley. I'm a senior planner at DPP, and I've been with DPP for about 5 years now, and I've been part of the Young Planners Committee for 3 years.
That's great, thank you everyone. And then we're also joined this afternoon by RTPI President Sue Manns. So I'm sure you don't need an introduction, but would you also like words about yourself?
Oh, thank you. And you probably spotted that I'm not a young planner, much as I would absolutely love to be. Unfortunately, that time has now passed me by. But I absolutely love doing the young planner visits. To me, they're the most special visits, because actually you're the future of our profession. And just the things that I know you're going to be sharing with us today be really interesting, and they're consistently inspiring in terms of what you say. So I'm really excited to listen to the various presentations, and thank you so much for letting me be part of it.
Oh, thank you very much for joining us. So just in terms of the format for this afternoon, I'll shortly hand over to Katherine and my other colleagues on the steering group who prepared a number of presentations on topics that we think are of particular importance to the planning profession. And particularly topics that we think are pertinent to the North East. Each presentation is going to last about 10 minutes, with Katherine starting with a look at how young people engage with town centres. Alastair will then follow on with kind of exploring strategies for reviving coastal towns, particularly with regard to young people. Patrick will be looking at pedestrianisation of town centres. And then Nicola will conclude the session by exploring the need for flexibility in town centres. So the series of presentations that we prepared build on key themes that we explored as part of the 2019 Young Planners Conference, which we're fortunate enough to hold in Newcastle. The theme of the conference was a sense of place, planning and identity, and it explored the important role that we as planners play in establishing a sense of belonging within the built environment. I don't know what that whistle is. So throughout the conference, we examined the impacts that changes to place have on spatial identity and the ways in which we choose to engage with them. A series of talks, workshops and tours across the weekend examined the human experience of place and how we can mediate change to promote interesting, inclusive and healthy places to live, work and play. Because the topics that we looked at then have kind of continued since, and some of the points that we're going to look at today, we'll be looking at how key themes have evolved and are now continuing to change with the unprecedented challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic's brought about. So I hope you all enjoy the presentation, and could I please ask you all to mute your microphones if you can and turn off your webcams to avoid any disruption to people presenting. There's going to be 5 to 10 minutes at the end of each presentation for any questions, and at the end of the session I'll ask you all just to come back on screen for any final thoughts and discussion. Thank you all very much for joining today, and I'll now hand over to Katherine to kick things off.
Thank you, Dom. Hopefully that screen, you'll be able to see the screen there. Welcome to the North East, Sue. I'm sure you've had a lovely walk around the quayside and up and down Grey Street and over to Monument and all the other places the North East has to offer. So today I am covering the topic which I wrote about in the Planner magazine last year, which was part of the opportunities we were given as hosting the Young Planners Conference. What I'm about to cover, I think, forms a good basis of the trends that are happening in our town centres with a focus on young people that planners should be considering in bringing forward in their future planning policies and national planning more widely. So this was undertaken in September last year, and it focuses on how young people interacted or interact with their town centre. Obviously, it was in a pre-COVID context, so actually this presentation is providing us the opportunity to maybe look back on what we found in 2019 and perhaps update it to the 2020 context. We undertook a survey which obtained over 230 responses, which specifically targeted 16 to 25-year-olds and how they interact with the high street. Those can be broadly aligned as the Gen Z generation and the younger millennials. We managed to collect over 100 responses on street in Newcastle city centre, albeit the survey wasn't defined to a particular town or city. We sent out the survey to a number of colleges and universities, and it was also shared online, which is how we got the more nationwide presence. But I think even though it wasn't limited to a specific town centre, I think it's probably relevant to all town centres in the UK. So what we wanted to understand was how young people are interacting with the high street. I'm going to say in 2019, perhaps let's change it for 2020 as time goes on, and particularly how social media is impacting their choices in using the local town centre, and whether actually do young people just use their town centre to go to the shop or a shopping trip, or actually is it used as something more diverse than that than perhaps it once was. So I take you to the first slide. So Gen Z or Generation Z have been described in the past as the retail's chief disruptors in terms of how they interact with retail more generally, but I think that's also applicable to the high street, and that was in a Retail Connect report written in 2018. So just looking at the figures on this slide below, I think you can see why they're probably disruptors, where there's no clear alignment as to one thing they prefer to do best. It's actually a mix of things, of what they like doing on the high street and why they go to town. So our survey found out that of the most often why young people decided to go to town and visit their town centre was actually to eat out. That was their main reason at 59%, and that was then followed by visiting the town centre to browse the shops at 47%, which is already a small indication of perhaps the leisure and food and beverage industry taking over the retail industry to some context in terms of how young people are using the town centre. From a social media perspective, 60% that said that they found out about things happening in their town centre on Facebook, and 41% found out via Instagram, which is interesting in terms of the promotion of our town centres and high streets more generally, whether it's retailers or brands or business improvement districts or even the local council, in how they're promoting their town centres and how they engage in greater footfall. From personal experience, I often find places to eat or new places to visit via Instagram. That's often the first place that it hits me, and that then gives me the inclination to perhaps go into my town centre, for example, albeit just to say I do no longer fit the categories that we actually surveyed. So just focusing more specifically on retail, we asked participants what their preferred shopping methods were, and I think from the survey you can see it's not clear at all. To some extent, there's not a dominant force as to what their preferred method is. You'll see that 39% of them chose to browse online and order online, but actually There's also at 33% they chose to browse in store and then buy in store, which actually, when considering it, that's not too much of a difference. If you add all those together that include the high street in some way, it comes to 60%. So that's young people interacting with the high street, either with actually physically buying something or just merely using it as a place to, I guess, window shop or browse for what they may be interested in, and then later going on to use the internet in that way. Again, I think it's important to mention that since the COVID pandemic, the ONS have recently, in April, announced that more than a third of retail sales were made online. I mean, when considering other generations as well, there's perhaps a new tranche of people buying online. So I think it'd be interesting to come back to these same questions in perhaps a year or two's time, once we have the new normal and who knows what's going to happen, to understand what the trends would be then. But I think that's just an interesting slide to show what people are doing, and I think it shows that actually retail isn't dominant in the high street anymore, and kind of moves towards those flexible uses. So this slide was actually written before the pandemic, when I did another presentation on this, and actually I wanted to keep it in because I think it's important to reflect on it and actually see in a 2020 update whether it still rings true. So at that time in February, when I last did this, there was the points to take away. Oh, sorry. The points to take away include the opportunity for high streets to harness technology more and harness it a lot further. I think we've seen that already in 2020. I think big brands and big retail chains and even big food retail chains are already onto this, and they're already fully aware of how their customer interacts. But it's actually getting those independent brands and retailers using it to increase their footfall, whether that's not just for retailers but for hairdressers or barbers or beauty salons. It's showing off what they can offer when the user, or not just a young person, anybody comes to the high street. Business improvement districts have also been using it as well. So anyone in Newcastle specifically promotes different events and businesses on their Instagram and Facebook page, and I've actually been using it recently as a way to open up Newcastle again and show what's been reopening and what's new since perhaps people were last in the city. Diversify is also an important one to keep interest and footfall in town centres high. I think planning has a role to play here, and in fact this is probably something Nicola's going to touch upon more later on in her presentation, to do with flexibility of town centres and what that means in a planning sense. Also, as I've said, retail plays a part, but it's perhaps not a dominant element as it once was. And increased engagement with young people. I think at the end of the day, as these young people grow older, their habits will probably go with them in terms of how they'll use the high street. So it's understanding what their habits might be in, say, 10, 15 years time, when technology, no wonder, will have moved on by then. But how will people be using the high street in that time frame instead? So in terms of a 2020 update, I think what we can take away is you don't know what you've got until it's gone. So in terms of perhaps the restrictions we've seen before and for eating out or meeting friends, etc., actually it's those uses that young people were focusing on in the survey, and in a 2020 update, it's what we can bring to more flexibility to the high street, which actually we've seen already with the new government initiatives, including the new use classes order, Class E, to increase that flexibility. Again, I think Nicola's going to touch more upon that later, so we can all round that up together. It's keeping interest and footfall high. Planning can also have a role to play, whether it be in temporary permissions or the use of Class E. Outdoor pop-ups, similar. Relaxed pavement licences of the government have introduced. And also the change in transport modes and how there's hoping to be, or there is now a push to walking and cycling, and how that could impact the town centre in the future. Our survey didn't really focus on transport modes, but again, it would be interesting to see how that could be impacted. And then finally, the power of social media. I think in the past 6 months, it's become more obvious what you can find on social media, and it is in some ways often the place where you find the first updates. So actually, could the planning system key into that, into how planners use the social media, whether that could actually be used as a greater engagement tool with young people? Although I think that's probably a whole new topic and a whole new presentation you could have on that. So that's everything from me. If you have any questions, I'd love to take them. Thank you very much.
That was super.
No, that was really good. Thanks very much for that, Katherine. Super, if you have any comments or questions that you want to start off with?
As my initial reaction, that was absolutely super.
Thank you.
I think it's I think it's so interesting because it looks at the town centres in a different way, and it's something that I've always thought is that town centres, when you go back over their history, they grew up as meeting places, and then they sort of shifted to becoming more retail, with the sort of core retail frontages that we had in the sort of 80s and 90s, and thou shalt not have anything that is not retail in that stretch. You're laughing, the policies that I mean.
Yeah.
And the other thing had to be outside. And so I just think this is so interesting, because it is bringing what you're saying, if I'm right, is that it's actually town centres have evolved again, and they're more coming back to that original role of meeting places. So is that sort of?
Yeah, I think the key is that it's a social setting, isn't it? And it's like I said, the 2020 update is perhaps you don't know what you've got until it's gone. And I think probably young people might portray that more in how they interact with town centres, but equally other age groups as well. So it's just having town centres as a social setting and making sure that planning can reflect that as well, and give that as an option for town centres, not perhaps just this must be a retail frontage here, nothing else, you can't have anything else in these units. So yeah.
Totally agree. And I think the other thing I'd just pick up from you is that the social media and the difference between Facebook and Instagram. Because my specialism is community engagement, one thing I'm so aware of is that the different platforms attract different types of users. So there's some interesting ones. I think it's Snapchat tend to attract more rural people than urban people to use it, which I found really fascinating when I started to get in. And then the age profile of them. But Facebook seems to be a fairly sort of general one, and that was scoring really highly. That seems to be one that sort of spreads most of the generations, including, I will say, my 92-year-old dad.
Yeah, I think we found that. I think Facebook over time does now spread the generations, doesn't it? And I think Instagram's probably catching up over time. There's obviously TikTok, which I've not mentioned, but I personally don't use that as a platform. I don't know if that's past my age category. So yeah, they're always out there, but I think they are very important tools to use for engagement, and they could be used in planning for greater engagement as well.
That was super. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katherine. So next we have Alastair. Okay.
Hello.
So Al, your presentation is on is it regenerating coastal towns for young people? Is that right? There we go.
That's right. Yes. Not sure why you've all suddenly appeared over my screen again. Just minimise that. Does that look okay broadly to everyone?
Yeah, it looks fine. Thanks very much, Al.
Good afternoon. My talk today is on reviving coastal towns for young people. And in this presentation, I'll be studying the UK's coastal towns, which on the whole have had quite a difficult few decades, particularly as places for young people to live and work. So I'll start with a bit of a journey into the far past as well as the recent past. So the seaside town of Whitley Bay, which is local to us in the northeast, was in its heyday a popular tourist destination. However, by the time I was growing up there, sadly its glory days had passed. So the Spanish city, with its memorable dome, is a Grade 2 listed building and local landmark that housed a fun fair. So on the left, you can actually see how popular the venue was before the advent of the package holiday. And on the right is a not uncommon scene from around the time I was visiting as a child. In fact, often we'd be the only ones there, so this picture could easily have been taken on one of my visits. The building did eventually sadly fall into disrepair and closed around the turn of the millennium. Just onto the next slide now, which is another part of Whitley Bay. My family also owned a confectionery business, which was entitled Welch as a Whitley Bay. And that finally shut its doors around about at the same time. So there's no longer demand for the boiled sweets that had been manufactured there over generations. And again, on the left, you can see the factory in its heyday. And on the right, more recently, sadly in a state of disrepair. So essentially, in terms of jobs or recreation, things have been better in the area, which is in desperate need of some investment. So just on to my next slide. Coastal towns have great potential, I think, as places to live, but many have struggled for decades to provide young people with sufficient opportunities. The growth of affordable package holidays overseas has hit areas where the local economy has been centred on tourism. I think some communities built around shipbuilding, ports, and fishing activities have also faced similar problems. So let's read a couple of points off the slide. So BBC News analysis of population projections last year had estimated that 40% of coastal communities in England could see the number of residents under 30 decline by the year 2039, with seaside towns in northern England hit particularly badly. In 2017, the Social Market Foundation showed that coastal communities in Great Britain were more likely to have a high unemployment rate, and coastal communities in England and Wales more likely to have a high proportion of people in poor health. Finally, English indices of deprivation figures released in September 2019 showed that 9 of the 10 most deprived neighbourhoods in England were in fact in coastal towns. So therefore, it is clear that there are a number of problems that need to be addressed. So how can planners help? Just 1 second, I think I've missed my notes there. Yes, so yes, can be done. To address the issues facing coastal communities, the government has invested almost £227 million into these areas, and this will have been done by the end of the year. And this is already producing results, according to the government's own response to the 2019 House of Lords report on the future of seaside towns. Some coastal areas have also managed to reinvent themselves. So I'll pick out a couple of examples. First one being Brighton, which, for example, has broadened its economy to focus on the digital sector as well as the tourism sector, and both are now of equal value to Brighton. It has also focused on education, with around 35,000 students at its 2 universities, and has also expanded its cultural offering with an emphasis on arts and special events. Second example is more local to us here, Seaham on the County Durham coast. This saw job losses when the last of the collieries closed, and the remnants of the coal that left the beach stained black. And however, the beach has since been cleaned up and the town has been transformed. Tommy, which is the character on the right on the screen, is a popular sculpture with visitors of all ages. There's also a locally famous seaside restaurant or dessert parlour, and a new shopping centre as well, which alongside the conversion of Seaham Hall Country House into a luxury hotel and spa, all draw people from miles around. In addition, the harbour at Seaham has also been renovated, and the Water Sports Activities Centre there actually won the RTPI Excellence in Planning for Health and Wellbeing Award in 2018. And in addition, the East Shore Village was built on the site of a local colliery and offers housing which is more affordable than many places in the wider area locally. So in both cases, there are now clear draws for young people to each area. So yes, where do we all fit in? How can planners help? I now outline 3 key ways in which planning could help realise benefits for young people in coastal communities. Firstly, improve transport connectivity. The House of Lords report that I referred to earlier stated that poor connectivity is central to the problems faced by many in coastal areas. Connectivity affects access to both educational opportunities as well as job opportunities in these areas. For planners, the challenge is to improve transport links to these areas and ensure that they cater to the needs of young people. So, for example, the number of drivers aged 17 to 20 has actually declined since the mid-1990s, and only a minority in this age group actually drive cars these days. So an increased focus on public transport must form part of the solution. However, walkers and cyclists in particular would also benefit from investment in public spaces and off-road green corridors, which would boost physical health and well-being also. I think this year COVID-19 has sort of seen additional impetus given to such measures for public health reasons as well, including, I'm pleased to say, Whitley Bay, which is now increased provision for cyclists. I think we're still ironing 1 or 2 issues out with that, but it's still great to see. My second point is to sell the benefits of coastal areas. I think we may be underestimating the potential attractiveness of coastal towns for young people. As an island nation, we seem to have a natural affinity with the coast. Young people tend to be environmentally aware and appreciative of the natural environment, and Greta Thunberg is a bit of a figurehead for this movement. Coastal towns often showcase unrestricted views of our seas in their natural state. This is something to capitalise on. The property prices in coastal towns are actually usually lower than those in cities, which is attractive to a generation that is increasingly unfortunately priced out of the property market. The growth of the digital economy means it's no longer essential to take part in the daily commute to the nearest city or to work in one of the more perhaps traditional sectors that you find in seaside towns. Of course, perhaps as we all know, working at home is now a credible alternative, which has been brought into the mainstream this year due to COVID-19. The number of universities offering online learning has also never been higher. So I think there's therefore potential for us as planners to design and market development in coastal towns for young people. Now to my third and final point, which is to improve the supply of suitable housing. House of Lords report that I had previously referred to points out that coastal towns often suffer from low levels of quality housing. Young people can find it hard to find suitable housing due to a comparative lack of resources and opportunities. A recent survey by mortgage lender Santander found that fewer than 25% those aged 18 to 34 would be able to afford a home by 2026. In 2006, that figure was 50%, so it will have halved in just 20 years. Build-to-rent developments are also a potential way forwards, an increasing number of available homes, whilst also being more attainable for young people. So planners should also encourage housing developments in sufficient number, of course, and ensure that they're both affordable and of sufficient quality to make coastal towns more desirable to young people. So, to summarise, looking to the future, there's hope again for seaside towns, and there's no reason why their fortunes cannot change. Returning to Whitley Bay, the town has recently seen a resurgence, I think. The seafront has been redeveloped. It's an image I took a few months ago at the top right of your screens. Spanish City has been converted into a successful venue featuring restaurants, cafes, bars and event spaces. Visit there a few times myself. And this all offers younger people greater prospects for work and leisure. That even won 2 RTPI awards last year in 2019 for excellence in planning for a successful economy and excellence in applying the heritage and culture. And even plans from right to convert my old family's sweet factory into modern apartments, offering hopefully ideal living spaces for young people. So once again, I think there's cause for optimism for our seaside towns, and I'd like to thank you all for listening.
It's brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Al. I think, I think Whitley Bay is a really good example of kind of how coastal towns can reinvent themselves. I know we came over there the other, I think it was the bank holiday weekend, and it was absolutely packed. It was more akin to on your first slide. It was so busy, which was great to see. I think maybe some of the ongoing issues with coronavirus have maybe inspired people to make the most of coastal towns, and particularly some areas that have maybe been a bit forgotten about or a bit unloved for the past few years. So that was great. Thank you very much. Do you have any comments on?
I thought that was absolutely brilliant, and what a great plug for the RTPI Awards. And you managed to get 2 venues in there. But that shows the power, doesn't it, of really good planning and the difference that it can actually make. So I know the Northeast quite well, and it struck me as you were talking. I was actually on the train coming back. I'd been up at Almouth, and I was coming back down. Yeah, and I was talking to somebody, as I do when I'm on a train, and they were saying that they had been attracted to live in Almouth because of the accessibility to London and also the ability to work from home. But what they were talking about, they were seeing was a starting to rise of house prices. So my question really is, with all of with the change, with the regeneration, with the revitalisation, with the change of image of the coastal towns, which is absolutely brilliant, do you think this could potentially draw people in of those sort of from outside to take the affordable housing that you're creating? Do you think it will change the dynamic in that way, especially with COVID?
Yeah, I hope so. Sort of Almouth's a nice town. I think there's sort of some sort of leeway, I suppose, and sort of a lot of these house prices in some of these areas are sort of lower than the regional average. So I guess if they went up, in some ways it'd be unfortunate, but so there's probably a bit of leeway for price to increase a bit, and that can sort of help with desirability of areas as well. So I know at least one of my friends is thinking of moving up the Northumberland coast, and he's a home worker, and perhaps he's sort of more isolated or certainly not a big city. Some of these coastal towns, I think, are seeing a bit of an increase in demand, and I think sort of the opposite of that. So I know a couple of colleagues in London who are now looking to sort of escape the city. So maybe another effect would be that house prices in London might become slightly more affordable. So I know someone who's else has been looking for accommodation in London. There's a few more places actually springing up than has been in the past. So hopefully this sort of benefits more generally for cities, even, I suppose, where people might be priced out.
That's great. I mean, we do want to see life brought in, and that comes with people. People make things happen, don't they? Being there. I think that's really, really interesting what you showed. And I say double marks for getting 2 RTPI awards into
It's all right. So the 2021s haven't been released yet, otherwise I'd have tried to put them in perhaps.
Just very quickly, I thought you putting in the photo of your family factory in Whitley Bay was absolutely brilliant. I love seeing old photos like that, but also the fact the story is ending really well. The story is actually the story of revival and regeneration, isn't it?
Yeah, it was nice to put that in there. Sort of black bullets for what they were sort of known for back in the day, but there's more fancier chocolate bars out there now. But hopefully this place will be sort of renovated soon, because it's been that way for, I suppose, 20 years, and the area is really coming on. So it's a good local success story as well for coastal towns, how they can turn around.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Great. Thank you. So next we have Patrick, who's going to talk about the pedestrianisation of town centres. If you're there, Patrick. Yeah, there you are.
Hello. And is that all full screen for everyone?
No, it's still showing as, it's not showing us full screen at the minute.
That should be there now.
Yeah, great, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dom. And good evening too. I'll get cracking. My co-young planners have set us up fairly well for this because they've mentioned a few topics that I'm going to come over. So my presentation is about the pedestrianisation of Newcastle city centre in this COVID-19 world landscape that we're in. And I'm going to use the Grey Street as an example in a case study. So from what I'm going to take you through today is I'm going to give you a bit of context of what I wrote last year in my opinion piece for the planner, just to see in where we are at now before I focus on the case study of Grey Street, looking at its past, where we are now in the present, before we'll look at a crystal ball if we can do that in the future. Before then, I take you through a summary. Go. So last year in the Planner magazine, the council was footed with a fair few challenges, such as a poor air quality in the city centre. They had a climate emergency declaration, as well as generally poor health and fitness. My article was to try and address these problems by using Blackett Street as an example, which in the next slide, I'll show you where that is and give you a bit more context. In Blackett Street is one of the main east-west corridors for the buses from the east end to the west end of Newcastle, and they all run through there. And as you'll see in the next slide, it gets a bit congested, and as a result, you get a lot of air pollution, you got a lot of traffic accidents. And as it is our main centre, and you'll see a lot of pictures because it's the treasure. And I think when you have a throwback, as I've mentioned here, it sort of deteriorates and it deters from what something should be. So just at the top left there was what it is now currently. There is plans to cut down this as well, and that's why I sort of focused upon it, because as you can see, the buses are 10 to the dozen. You've got vans in there, you've got people trying to get across. It's messy. And on the right hand side, this just shows you've got the very top is Blackett Street, and as you come down, you can see Grey Street down the centre, which I'm going to come on to, Market Street, Clayton Street there, and just because I know you'll be interested as well, you've got the big market where it's the B1307, and then you've got the two pictures of Grey Street at the bottom as well. And I don't know if you're a fan of the TV show The MASH Report, but it's often used as a backdrop in one of the settings for one of the news segments. So here's the Grey Street past. It was designed by Richard Granger, John Dobson, who I'll come back to, and Thomas Oliver. And it is one of the finest streets in Newcastle. And what I've put in here for you today is a quote by Ian Nairn, who got me into, who's one of my sort of planning heroes. And he brought to me basically to be a bit more proud of Newcastle and the architecture. I used to be a waiter, and I just came back late one night and just flicked on BBC4. It was on about Nairn's towns, and it inspired me to get the book. And what I also find very interesting about these three pictures is you can see the one at the top left, as I look, when you see the horse and cart in the early 1900s, down to the middle of the 1930s, through to the Get Carter era of the 1960s, you can see how the street was mostly dominant in the first photograph. Then as you see the car increased in dominance until on the third picture, you see how with designated car parking spaces, the street is starting to become a bit more of a car park. And as I progress to the next slide, in the present, you can see how the cars become dominant and it's been described as a car park. and I just feel it's a bit of a shame really, because it's such a beautiful street, and that's why I've used Ian Nairn's quotes there to show you and to give you a greater appreciation of especially what I think of the street. I mean, I was in there with my friends a couple of Sundays ago, and when they just started putting the COVID measures in, which I'm going to come on to, and I just stood there and I just took it all in. But as we've got now, you've got the climate emergency, you've got the air quality conundrum, you've got the obesity crisis, you've got a whole mould of problems that the council has still got. And so they've been trying to tackle it over the past year. So they've been trying to implement clean air zones, and what they've also done, as you've seen in Alastair's presentation, which they've tried to do in Newcastle as well, they've put semi-permanent bollards on, so it creates more cycle lanes. And as I'm going on to show you as well, they're creating more bus-only routes to prioritise buses, and to try and get more people enjoying the streets more, in basically booting out the car. As much as that may seem a bit of a blunt way to say it, I think it should be the right way. And as I am going to come on to, it's the right way to do that. But before that, coronavirus has gone on top of all these problems that I've already said. So as the central government and the council have tried to tackle the air quality problem, they've put measures in place, but it's become such a political hot potato, because you've got, in the past, you have taxi drivers having demonstrations in the streets on the one hand, and even when I sort of put out the idea last year about what I was going to write in my article, my gran nearly jumped out of her seat, because she was like, well, if you reroute the buses and the taxis from Blackhead Street, how am I going to do my shopping? So you have this conundrum on the one side, but then on the other side, you've got the Extinction Rebellion, and they've been having protests, die-ins, and they've been doing a lot of demonstrations on the other side to try and get the government to get their net zero carbon by 2050. Then, as we have now, we've got the whole coronavirus situation, which is putting a magnifying glass on the whole crisis, where you've got the retail sector as it was struggling. You've got, can you use buses anymore? That's another problem. You've got, can you implement active travel measures to get people into the town centre, to enjoy the town centre in a clean, carbon friendly way? And as you can see, the council is in this conundrum. With coronavirus, they've got special measures to try and help and create pavement cafes, such as the business and planning bill, which is being put out. And it's just a very interesting time. So you're thinking, where do you go from here? And the council themselves have come up with a lot of solutions to this. So as you can see here, increasing the width of pavements, having a designated cycle lane, having a one-way bus lane, which is the Q3 is the only bus to go down Grey Street, while having spaces for cars, like to load and park, as well as more pavement space. And as you can see, it's always nice weather in Newcastle. So how, as we go forward, and especially as what the news is today, to keep the retail sectors and the hospitality sectors going, it's a very big conundrum. I'm going to use that word again. And I've been looking at other cities where I've been, and when I've just been thinking about it and how functional they are. I was lucky enough to go to Bordeaux with our family a few years ago, and they've prioritised the tram, and how everyone uses the tram, and they've put a lot of money into the tram, and it works. Everything works. You've got a cycle lane, as you have here. You've got the walking. And then I went to Brussels with my friends at Christmas time, and it was absolutely freezing. But what they did is, in case there was bad weather, you have the marquees, you have covered areas, they bring heaters in, which I know are poor carbon site, but it does bring people into the centre. And if you are going to bring people into the centre, you need to make it as comfortable and you need to make it as welcoming as you can. You need to make people thirst to make it a place that people want to come. So as I move on, you've got in the blue, these are designated to be the main bus routes into the city centre. So from the north, you've got the Great North Road, which will run through Percy Street down there. Then you've also got Grey Street, which will be going one way, and Pilgrim Street coming up the other. And when I did this last Thursday, I was really ready to tear into it, because I thought, if you're going to go one way into Grey Street, how is it going to work? But when I was out on Saturday, I was looking up, and when the buses were coming up Pilgrim Street, it made a lot more sense, because that allows you to get into the city centre. And as I've said before, good old John Dobson, with his street named after him, and I'll come on to that in a bit as well, and to see how that's been invested in a very sensitive way, in my opinion. And you can see from where I was talking about before in terms of Blackett Street in the city centre, to make more enjoyment out of them, they're all in grey and they will become more pedestrianised for everyone to be able to access and enjoy. And what I think is very intelligent of the council, what they've done, is where you've got the disabled parking, you can get, as much as you don't want as many cars, you can get the taxis in there to drop off the people, such as my grandmother, who's not very well on her feet. But it still enables, with the bus routes that have come in, good east, west, north and south connections across the river through Swing Bridge, the Tyne Bridge, and West Road, Westmoreland Road, and down through City Road, Newbridge Street. So it creates the necessary connections for a vibrant city and a good city. And you've also got the grey streets there, like the Barrett Road, Queen Victoria Road, where enables people to drop off, especially on a Saturday, with Newcastle United Football Club at the centre there. So to sum up, we've got money is always a problem, and I think at the moment, if the government are deterring people from going onto buses and using public transport if it's not necessary, then, as we've seen during the first lockdown that we've encountered, you need to have investment in walking and cycling. It was on the news the other day, Sustrans, they think, especially in the northeast, we're on the verge of a active travel revolution because of the popularity of the walking and the cycling during lockdown, and they're trying to transfer them leisure trips into utility trips and using them to get into the city centre, create a city centre life. But John Dobson Street, which you see in the centre there, that costs £1 million for that. I mean, I get the bus there regularly to get off, and it works very, very well. But when every penny's getting scrambled for, when people are losing their jobs, when there's less of a need to go into the city centre on a daily basis to go into the office, when people are home working, then you have to look at the viability of the investment. And for people to come in, you need the investment to get them there, so that then the cash receipts can come back in to pay for what you've done. Because at the moment, John Dobson Street's been paid by a very controversial speed camera and bus only, and there was a fair few £1,000s paid out wrongly by people in fines. So it's finding a way of getting people and enticing people into the city centre in a clean, safe way. But as you can see at the moment, I think there's a lot more questions than answers, and I think as planners we need to take the brave decisions now, because we're not going to have a better chance of doing it, because this provides the opportunity. And there's been numerous reports and surveys done in the past months where people are supportive more supportive of a green recovery than they ever have before. And you've even got the chief executive of British Petroleum saying now is the time to change. And when you've had a pandemic which is caused by human hand essentially, and we've all seen David Attenborough's programme at the weekend, time is now. And I'll just leave you with 2 cartoons to show, just to think on and show if we're going to have progress and continue using the car, well, that's not going to be very pleasant. And going right is just from a traffic campaign in Canberra in Australia. Let's just say thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Patrick. I think you said it's an interesting time at the minute for things like this. I think there's a couple of, several different agendas which are currently at odds. I mean, I'm in the office today. I think the majority of people I've spoken to have been actively choosing to drive in at the minute, either because of nervousness or government guidance on using public transport. And that's obviously less people coming into the centre at the moment, but it's, as a long-term view, it's just not going to be sustainable. And, those two, we've got the health agenda coming potentially to blows with the sustainability agenda there. So, as I say, I think there's a lot of questions to be answered, but it does need some, quite innovative, bold and brave approaches, I think, to kind of break what is a pretty long-running cycle. Over to you, really, if you have anything else to ask.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that word that you used 3 times, conundrum. It really is. And in fact, it's got my brain thinking this all over the place, because interestingly, when I started work, I started at Birmingham City Council. And the 1980s, there you are, there's the giveaway. The 1980s, which you wouldn't remember at all, was a time where we were having very high unemployment. There were riots within the city. And there was also this issue of buses cramming New Street, which is the main arterial street through Birmingham, and the shopping centre. Yeah. And one of my sort of first, I did the International Convention Centre, but from that we moved into the city centre to try and regenerate that and sort it out. And we wanted to pedestrianise it. And exactly what you were saying about your grandma and her reaction to your article was what we were getting off the lead retailers. And it took us 3 attempts to get that pedestrianisation through. And what the result of that has been the air quality, which is not what people were talking about in the 1980s particularly, but the air quality change from actually doing that, and the fact people could walk about. And come COVID, having those pedestrianised streets has meant that it's easier for people to pass. You're not having to put the bollards out and all that sort of thing. So that really took me back. It really did. But going forward, we've had ample notice of the climate crisis, haven't we? We can't claim like this has just come round the corner. And my biggest worry, and I'd be interested on your thoughts on that, is that in this desperate attempt of people to go back to what they saw as normality, we'll just chuck the baby out with the bathwater. We'll forget the bits of normality that some people didn't like because they were inconvenient, like climate change and trying to get them out of their cars and into buses, and they'll just want to go back to their panacea of normal. So I don't know what you think on that, but fascinating.
Well, I think on the one hand you've got it's like 2 strands. You've got if another lockdown is put in, if we're sort of strive to a new normal, but if there's a lockdown, you generally are supporting your local high street, which in many cases you'd be walking or cycling to anyways, you'd hope, because they'd be in walking distance. For the town centres, your main problem is, as I've said, people's probably lack of trust in the hygiene of buses and metros as we have here. But I think there'll need to be a concerted effort at a high level, because it's all well and good sort of central government saying don't use the buses, but like for people that may have to use the bus every day, and again we've got another, don't know if dichotomy is the right word, but the young people apparently are disproportionately affected by coronavirus because they haven't used active travel to get or public transport to get into work. But if there's just common sense measures taken, and as I think the most people I've had on the bus with me is, I think it's about 7. Like, 'cause it's just no one's using them. But at the same time, if more people can get on them, because I mean the metro is really struggling. I think they've had about 2 cash injections from the central government, but there needs to be a bit of a consensus from local and central government, which I think, to basically say, look, if you need them to get in, because at the end of the day, city's going to disappear, and I think Newcastle's not going to be the only one. There's going to be cities all up and down the country where good public transport and active travel need to be integrated into the system, so that when a normality does come out, however long that'll take, it's there and it's ready, and people can see that sense and they can use it. And when something works well, people generally use it. Like, my dad always uses a case of, like, well, if there's more buses provided, then I'd use them, instead of being every 15 minutes, being every 5 minutes, like say what the tube is down in London. But again, that takes investment. But if the investment's put in now, gamble as it may be, when we do come out of it, the car might be seen, as I see it, as a bit of a relic, and we can move on to the future.
Great, thank you very much, Patrick.
No worries, thank you. Thank you.
So just to round off the presentations today, we now have Nicola, who's going to speak about flexibility in town centres. Okay, you're muted.
Nope, I think, can you see my screen?
Yeah, that's it. There's just a little bit of a time lag, but yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much, Dan. So my presentation is going to look at flexibility in our town centres, and is something which I focused on in a blog post that I wrote last year for the Young Planners edition of the Planning magazine. So just as a brief overview, I'm going to start by looking at some of the recent changes in our town centres and the government responses to these challenges. I'm then going to look more specifically at meanwhile uses as a means of allowing and encouraging flexibility, which includes some examples from here in the North East. So I think it's clear that our town centres are going through a process of change, which is something Katherine's already touched upon in her presentation. And even more recently, town centres are being put under a lot more pressure as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The growth of online shopping is one of the main factors which has impacted on our town centres. For many, online shopping is a more convenient and gives you access to greater choice of goods compared to those which can be found in store. And I think online shopping has increased further during the pandemic, with people either being unable to or not comfortable with visiting town centres. This increase in online sales has also led to the closure of some major retailers in the past few years, including BHS, Woolworths, and more recently Debenhams, and even some John Lewis stores. Some retailers, such as Katherine, have also made a switch to being online only and no longer have that town centre presence at all. On the other hand, whilst there has been a decline in traditional retail, there has been a noticeable increase in uses which concentrate on social interaction, with more cafes and restaurants and leisure uses, with things such as escape rooms, bowling and indoor golf popping up in our town centres. I think this shows that the ways in which people are using our town centres is changing, and it's important that our town centres can adapt to this. So the government are actively seeking to address these challenges faced in our town centres, and have already introduced a range of initiatives over recent years. I've listed some of the key ones here. This includes funding opportunities such as the Future High Streets Fund, which aims to renew and reshape town centres and high streets by providing funding to support transformative changes. This is something which a number of towns in the North East have made the shortlist for, and Hartlepool has actually been selected as one of the 14 towns to pilot the scheme, so it will benefit from training and support to see that through. The shortlisted towns must develop a strategic vision and business case for specific projects, and Hartlepool has recently been running a consultation with the community to shape their regeneration proposals. The planning system has also introduced a range of measures to help our town centres, including permitted development rights, which aim to make it easier and more flexible to allow changes of use in town centres. This has included PD rights to enable the change of use from office and some retail uses to residential use, and some changes of use between certain A-class uses. Now, more recently, the government has introduced the new use classes order, which only came into force at the beginning of this month and introduces 3 new use classes. These use classes cover a much broader range of uses and is intended to allow greater flexibility to change uses within town centre without the need to obtain planning permission. It will make many local planning policies relating to shop frontage and A1 uses obsolete now, and could also result in local authorities having less control over the mix of uses in our town centres. However, it does have the potential to assist with decreasing vacancies and the changing trends in our town centres with a move away from these traditional A1 retail uses. So the majority of these initiatives are, however, still in the fairly early stages, so the success is not yet known. But I think it'll be interesting to monitor the impacts of these initiatives going forward to see whether they are working or whether they need tweaking. There's also other options to facilitate greater flexibility within town centres, and one of these is meanwhile uses, which I'm going to cover in the next couple of slides. So meanwhile uses are defined as temporary uses for buildings and plots and can be seen as a means of regeneration. They can create temporary and short-term value from underused and unused land and buildings, and can bring life and activity to an area before permanent development begins or before a more permanent use is found. It's something which is frequently seen across cities in Europe, and I think they do quite well at it. And whilst gaining in popularity in the UK, it's still quite unknown to many. People tend to be more familiar with meanwhile uses in the form of shipping container developments on vacant sites, but meanwhile uses can also exist in the form of reusing existing vacant buildings for things like pop-up shops. Whilst meanwhile uses are typically temporary, the majority would still require planning permission, which can be seen as a barrier given they would typically require the same level of detail as an application for a permanent use, which can often be quite a costly and lengthy process for a use which might only be there for a couple of years. But as mentioned on my previous slide, the introduction of new use classes could also assist with flexibility in town centres, and could go some way to making it easier for meanwhile users to occupy these vacant spaces by removing the need for planning permission when switching between uses, and also offers benefit to landlords in enabling a quicker take-up of these vacant units. However, it's still early days for new use classes, and it's not yet clear whether some councils might seek to impose conditions to restrict certain uses within the use class order, or how that's going to be dealt with. I think there is limited guidance on meanwhile uses, and whilst an online search does bring up kind of various articles and websites on meanwhile uses, I think there's still quite a long way to go in promoting meanwhile uses, and it's something which hasn't really been promoted by the government too much to date, but given the benefits it can offer, I think there's definitely merit in promoting this further. Additional guidance and further measures to make obtaining meanwhile uses more accessible could allow them to become a more important tool to help our town centres adapt, alongside some of the other measures which are already being put in place. So we're lucky enough in the North East to have a few examples of meanwhile uses, which I think is a really positive sign for the region. I've included 3 examples here on my slide, which I'm just going to briefly talk through. So we've got by the River Baruco, which sits on the Gateshead quayside and occupies a site which was formerly in residential use but had been vacant since 2013 when the flats were demolished. This site currently has temporary consent until the end of December 2022 and comprises a range of shipping containers occupied by food and drink uses, and there's also a bike shop down there as well. This use has quite noticeably improved the vitality of this part of the quayside, and it's always quite a popular destination. We've also got Stack, which is in Newcastle city centre and occupies the former Odeon site. The site currently forms part of the East Pilgrim Street development area, which is likely to come forward for more permanent development in the coming years. There's already some applications for sites surrounding where Stack is. It currently comprises, again, of shipping containers with a range of shops, cafes, bars and restaurants, and the units are all targeted at small independent retailers. Again, this has permission until the end of 2022, although there is currently an application in which will see it extended until 2024. Based on the success of Stack, a second Stack has also recently been opened in on the Sunderland coast in Seaburn, which occupies the former Seaburn Centre. Again, this is a temporary use which seeks to enliven the vacant space whilst the Seaburn master plan is being brought forward. Then my final example, this one's slightly different. It's the Enterprise Arcade in Stockton, which occupies a former department store and provides space for business startups. So occupiers are able to take advantage of lower rates, and many have actually since gone on to open up their own stores within town centre, showing the positive benefits that it can have there. And finally, looking to the future, I think it's clear that our town centres are changing and are being used differently with a move away from the traditional kind of A1 retail uses. And these changes do need to be embraced, and we need to ensure that our town centres can adapt to these changes so that we have a future going forward. I think that meanwhile uses can play an important role in this by enabling flexibility, and temporary uses can provide opportunities to test new uses and attract smaller independent retailers to town centres who might then go on to open more permanent shops. However, I think there is probably some challenges here. For example, when temporary uses such as Stack come to an end, while some occupiers may move on to take up a more permanent home, it could result in the loss of some businesses who then have nowhere to go. I think there's probably some lessons to be learned here, and it might be important maybe for our town centres to provide more smaller units which are more attractive to these smaller independent businesses rather than the traditional larger stores that we typically have, and providing a greater space for social interactions as well. I think there could also be opportunities for these temporary uses to become more permanent if they are being truly successful. Overall, I think there probably is a need for more research in this area, which could be used to inform guidance and initiatives to encourage meanwhile uses and perhaps further changes in the planning system to help facilitate this. And that's it. So if you have any questions, Sue, I'd be more than happy.
Oh, yes. Well, you brought everything together from the other three presentations. So that was, you just pulled it all together, and it's about the way it's all those things that sort of change, and the flexibility. And I mean, to some extent, is the planning system sort of able to move as fast as the circumstances around us are? But the one thing apart from the fact nobody's got a crystal ball, we have no idea. We love to have one. There's one thing that you talked about that really got me thinking, and that really was that in terms of the meanwhile uses. And you made the comment about the River Brew Company and the vibrancy of the place that had been created as a result of the shipping containers. And then again, when you moved on to Stack, it was exactly the same. And my mind then went to think about, well, going back a few years when I was younger, the sort of place that I went to, I didn't always want to go to the traditional place that was built to look like a pub or to look like a standard restaurant, where you felt as if you were forced into a certain way of doing things. And I love the innovative different ways. And I just wonder whether this is actually, they really do have, and you talked about whether they should be permanent and the need for more research, but actually, is there a place for this different, non-designed, non-standard type of use that creates a different atmosphere?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's definitely scope for them to be more permanent. And I think what people do like about them so much is that they are different. Like you said, it's not just going to a standard bar. It's something that's a bit more quirky and a bit more different. You get a few different uses all in one space, and a big outdoor space to socialise, which I think is really attractive to younger people, and just shows kind of the different ways in which we're using spaces now. I think I think there's definitely some scope out there for them to become maybe more permanent, slightly more unplanned, and I think that's what people like about them.
Yeah, I think it's a very different way of looking at it, isn't it? It's about that unplanned feel. It's about, you know, you go into a Costa in any place, whether it be, you know, Newcastle or Abu Dhabi, it's a Costa, you know it is. But these are different, they're unique, and they have a character because of how they've evolved. So I think it's a different way of thinking about it. It doesn't look perfect. And I mean, it just, how do you compare it to, you know, Grey Street and things like that? It's just different, isn't it? But it's really, really got me thinking massively. So I think it is an area where we do need to think, and we need to think about the mix and about design in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's the meanwhile, and these kind of temporary uses as well, is because there's not, I mean, I guess the kind of the element of risk and the element of kind of commitment to them isn't quite the same as when you're going in for a permanent development. So even by nature of kind of the businesses and some of the uses that you get in there, some of them are a bit riskier and they are a bit different. And it just, as you say, it just kind of innovation in the sense of the actual planned form of the units then results in innovation in terms of uses, and you know, there's all sorts of things come out that people might not have had the opportunity to try, or might not at least have had the opportunity to try in a kind of a city centre location at least. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other point you made really resonated as well, and that was the Enterprise Arcade. And the question about, I mean, really, it has an incubator role. But I think the question you really raised is, well, what happens when that's redeveloped? Will the places be affordable to those sort of those businesses as they move on? Some will have grown and they'll want to move, but some maybe just need that micro environment. So absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. That's fine. So that brings us to the end of the presentations. Could I just ask everybody to rejoin with their video chat? Great, thank you very much. So firstly, thank you all for preparing the presentations. They've been incredibly interesting, sparked a lot of debate and conversation. So I don't know if you want to make any closing comments, or if you have anything to add just at the end.
The one thing that I'd add is you're all inspirational. You've really got my mind buzzing. Just so much that you've talked about that has really stimulated and connected, and it's all about good planning, and absolutely fantastic. And I'm going to be watching it again when it goes up on the webinar, and I'm really looking forward to that. So thank you so much. You are really just great. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. It's been great. We've had some really interesting discussions, and yeah, we'd hope to catch up again soon.
Yeah, the future of the profession is in safe hands.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and I'll catch you all soon.
Yeah, bye.